Now, whether you think that the solution is perhaps some of the things that Patrick has advocated, or perhaps whether it's something like we need to force farmers to use more nitrogen, or whatever your belief is as to what the solution is. You think, what do we need to do that? We need a framework. We need a rigid framework, in some respects, that controls farmers, that controls food production. We need cooperation between countries, between regions, and so that those regions can negotiate with other regions of the world. So what do we need? We need some sort of common policy for agriculture. Well, lo and behold, we have one. We need a common policy which is designed to address food shortages. Well, what is the policy that was designed in the 50s to address food shortages? Well, in the UK, it was the Agriculture Act back in 1947, something which significantly complemented the work of the WI throughout the war years, and that was subsumed into the Common Agricultural Policy, which was drafted in the 1950s across Europe, in order to stop war across Europe and in order to make sure that European people had enough food on the table. So that policy that we have in existence is needed now more than it ever was before. We need a strong common policy, irrespective of what any differences or agreement we have on how that policy should control food production. We currently have a number of member states, including our own, and successive governments, who are arguing against that policy. They're effectively arguing for it to be completely watered down, to be significantly underfunded, and that is a major concern, and it should be a major concern for everyone who is concerned about food security, because without fair incomes for farms there will be no food production. And what will happen is we will rely increasingly on areas such as the Amazon basin for our food, and that means that any impact that we have on agriculture, on the environment, which is bad, will be exacerbated because it will be produced in areas which simply are not regulated. So I hope, above all, that irrespective of where this debate goes within the WI, I hope that more than anything else, just as I'm sure that the WI supported the 1947 Agriculture Act, which complemented its own essential work during the war effort, that it will also significantly support a strong common agricultural policy which does whatever it is we decide needs to be done, as Alan says, right now and also in the future. Thank you.
And I really commend that it goes out to the community and enlivens more of a debate, because that's exactly what we need. I'm reminded about 1947, not that I was there, but reading Ira Bevan's speeches, of course. You remember the one about what on earth are we doing? You know, we got the worst winter in 1947. We were bust. Austerity was with a big A. We were independent post-war, and the weather wasn't very good, and we had an energy crisis. And he said something like, you know, what's a country like this doing, which is built on coal and surrounded by fish? Well, today we don't necessarily want to use all the coal, and the fish stocks are going down, so we've got a new crisis. But what happened after that 1947, of course, as I tell my students, is that we created infrastructures throughout the 47 acts and so on, which solved the problems of the time. They've caused problems since, but we can do it, even in periods of austerity. I don't want to repeat anything that the speakers have said, because I agree with all of it. I just want to add a few points, 4 points really, on an optimistic note, not a sort of critical diagnosis, but an optimistic note. I do think, as the Minister said, and some of us have been around quite a long time, from farming for the future back in the 90s through to the new, well, relatively new food strategy, Food for Wales, Food from Wales. We have done a lot of innovation in Wales, I think, and I think we should be proud of what we are doing in this field. We're not starting from a blank sheet. We are making a lot of progress, and I think, as we see, I think we're making a lot more progress to the retrograde nature of what's going on unfortunately in England, for English rural people and urban people in many cases. So I think we've got retrogression going on in that area. We can talk about that over questions. So there's a division developing there. We are becoming an international innovative region. I was in New Zealand before Christmas and could see that people know about what's going on, and more connections across the world is something that we could develop. Let me make four points of opportunities in this transformational period that we are definitely in. One, it's clear to me that the one potential benefit of all this is that the emphasis again is, as it was in 47, is going to be on new forms of innovative, sustainable production. And we've got to rethink the productive basis and infrastructure, what I call the bioeconomy, because it's not just about food, although that's very significant. It's about a whole range of feedstocks that the land base can create, from food, fibre, energy, bioenergy, bioplastics, biorefining. Land is going to become more and more significant, not only for urban purposes, but also for productive capabilities. And in Wales, I think, and in the UK more generally, we need to rethink what the opportunities of that are. Now, the problem is that we've been devaluing the production end, and we've been hyping the prices up of the consumer end. So we've got to solve, with this opportunity we've got, is one of reconnecting. It's a theme of the agri-food strategy, reconnecting producers and consumers in more equitable and justice-based food supply chains. And it also links to energy, actually, because these things are merging. So what we're going to be seeing, I think, is a new emphasis on land-based resources, and it's an opportunity. And the question is, to what extent can the production sector really start to capture more value out of the chain? We all know, right back into the 90s, when we started the whole process of referring the retailers to the Competition Commission and the OFT and so on, this debate about the cost-price squeeze and so on, farm gate prices has gone on as it expressed itself this summer. We've got to have a much more serious look at the ways in which the producer and the consumer can capture real value, nutritional value at the consumer end, and productive and economic value at the producer end and the consumer end. So there's an opportunity there. It's how we manage these processes, I think. And we're seeing, I think, a growing demand for many Welsh products and ecosystem services. If we add to land not just the issue of food production in its traditional sense, but issues to do with amenity and food and fibre issues, we can see a much more multifunctional opportunity there. So that's one thing I think we need to plan out and capture more value for it, for our producers and our rural-based industries, actually, not just the producers, but all of the industries that are based on it. A second issue, again, which has been alluded to already, I think, is the way in which we can use an innovative region like Wales as a basis to interlink the influences across the multi-level structures we operate in the UK, in the European Union, and at global level. As the Minister says, I think at all of those levels we shouldn't be unambitious about doing things locally and translating them up that chain, because at the global level it isn't going to work, it seems to me, unless we've got really grounded things that are happening, that you're doing, that we can translate and demonstrate good practice in those areas. But it's clear we need some connections between these different levels of the community, of what we're doing in Wales, what we're doing in the UK, and so on. It's riddled with all sorts of tensions. We know it's never going to be perfect. I think we've got to be pragmatic about that, but we need more alignment of things that we can do in those ways, through the civic sector, through the public policy sector, and through economic markets. And you can see a growth, I think, hopefully, in the development of fair trade, ethical food systems that are, you know, they're not just local. It's translating the local to the those things together. A third point, clearly to me, and again it's a pragmatic point really, is that it seems to me one of the key issues is diversity. We need more diversity in our food system, whether it is in terms of the high street, whether it's in terms of outlets, it's got too concentrated and too narrow. And as with biodiversity and human diversity, it seems to me food is naturally something that should be much more diversely provided. And I think historically, you know, further on, future generations will look back on us in this sort of dark ages and say, well, you know, they solved the problem for a while, but what on earth went on there? Because they were wasting so much stuff. It's so inefficient. And that we need to have much more diversity. And we're seeing progress, I think, in that diversity in a whole range. And we should celebrate that diversity, give awards to that diversity, you know, bring back ways in which we can give awards and certify these things for that diversity process, and more interconnections between that. Clearly, less waste is an important element of that, and also linking food to community development, whether it's urban community development or rural urban development. I think linking food to community development is really important. The final point I'll make, the fourth point really, is about knowledge and skills. And this links to the issue of value. I'm not exactly very pleased with the abolition of the Wages Board, as I made clear to the House of Lords a few weeks ago, and they didn't particularly like that. But it seemed to me that when we're talking about upskilling the knowledge base of the rural workforce, you know, what are we expecting them to work on? £5.60 an hour or less, changing our overtime routes, you know, changing our overtime rules. Health and safety, one of the most dangerous industries in the country. So I think we've really got to look at enhancing the knowledge base, the skills base, and making the industry of food much more attractive to our younger population, women and men. And women are taking the lead across Europe in rural development initiatives. So I think this is a really important agenda, and you can see some of this happening. Clearly it's at the higher end level, at the science level as well. Professor Chris Pollock from IGO has just done a very good report, again Wales based, on the need for innovation and development and research science base. We need that at the high end, but there's also the other end of this, which is at the practical skills level. And I think it's something the WI and bodies like that could help with, about bringing back skills in cooking and in preparing food, and skills in schools and communities and so on, celebrating that point. So I think there's a lot of work to do there, but in the end I think we're in a good position to take this challenge and make the transformations that I think we're going to see over the next 10 or 15 years. Thank you.